Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Happy Wild Card Monday, Steelers Nation. Tonight, the Pittsburgh Steelers take on the Houston Texans in the wild card round of the NFL playoffs. You win, you go up against the New England Patriots on the road next week on divisional weekend. If you lose, the season is over. Tonight, we'll be having over 2 hours of pregame coverage here on Steelers Talk. We'll be starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for our live watch party. We'll answer your questions. We'll go over everything you guys need to know about this matchup before we kick things off at Acrisure Stadium this evening. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if the Steelers unfortunately lose tonight, that means we'll be kicking off our offseason coverage tomorrow, and of course that's going to be going throughout the 2026 offseason. So whether we get more playoff coverage next week or we kick off our offseason coverage, make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already for wall-to-wall Steelers coverage every single day of the year. So I just wanted to get in front of a camera here today, guys, to break down some of the last-minute storylines, some of the things that I'm going to be watching for, weather conditions for tonight in Pittsburgh, the whole kind of situation here, so you guys feel prepared going into tonight's game, which is obviously a big one. You know, we're officially in the do or die stage of the season. The Steelers have been here for a week now. Last week was essentially a playoff game versus the Baltimore Ravens. You barely escape Acrisure Stadium with that W, and now tonight you go up against C.J. Stroud and that Houston Texans defense, which is absolutely stellar, coming off of 9 straight victories. Now, I will say, you know, some of those wins as of late haven't been that impressive. They gave up over 30 points to Riley Leonard and the Colts last week, and then, you know, they played a close game versus the Raiders a couple weeks ago. So it's not like some of these wins have been all that impressive for the Houston Texans. And honestly, I think over the last month, they haven't even been playing that great. But they have been winning football games, obviously. And, you know, they're a hot football team coming into a cold weather city. So that's going to be an interesting storyline to keep an eye on tonight. In terms of the weather, okay, I was kind of hoping that this week it was going to be a little bit colder in Pittsburgh, where I was hoping it would get into the teens. It would be kind of closer to that Monday Night Football matchup we had against Miami, where there's a pretty clear weather advantage. But tonight it looks like it's going to be somewhere in the low 30s. It looks like it might not even dip below 30 degrees tonight. So even though it is a cold weather game technically, and for a warm weather dome team like the Houston Texans, that's going to play a little bit of a factor. It's not like it's going to be absolutely frigid, at least for Pittsburgh standards, in the month of January. So that might give Houston a little bit of a reprieve there from the elements in Pittsburgh, but it will be somewhat cold in Pittsburgh tonight. It also appears like it'll be somewhat clear. So there won't be any snow or rain, at least it appears right now, on the radar. So we'll keep you guys updated with the latest when we get to the watch party tonight. But, you know, along with the weather, and that does play a factor in this game for sure, in my opinion, something that doesn't get talked about very often is playing surface. This is a Houston Texans team that I believe played 14 of their 17 regular season games on turf, okay? And they just haven't played that many games on grass this year. And this has been a Texans team that has struggled, especially in the playoffs when they're playing on the road and playing on grass. And in fact, C.J. Stroud and the Texans during the Stroud era are 0 for 2 in playoff games, played outside and played on grass. And obviously this is a Steelers team that has played on grass just about, you know, as much as any team in the National Football League. You know, there's grass fields all over the AFC North, obviously, and of course in Pittsburgh it's a grass field as well. And over the last month, I mean, last several games, except for Detroit, have been played on grass in the cold weather environment. So this is definitely a playing surface and a weather type of game that the Steelers are used to playing in. And it's not a game that the Houston Texans are particularly prepared to play in either. So, you know, I do think that the Steelers have that advantage tonight. How much of an advantage is it? I guess we'll just have to see when we get to the stadium this evening and we see how the game unfolds. But I do think that is something to keep your eye on as we get into the game. In terms of the stakes for tonight's game, it is pretty simple. If you win, you get a divisional round playoff game on the road in Foxborough versus a team that you have already beaten this season in the New England Patriots. Now, what teams are, in the divisional round of the playoffs, they're different than what they were in week 3. But I do think that this Steelers team is a lot different right now than they were in week 3 of the NFL season. And yes, they did need to force 5 turnovers to win that game against the New England Patriots. But I also think that the way that this Steelers team is playing, especially if they can beat a Houston Texans team tonight that's coming off of 9 straight victories, they can win tonight. And, they've rattled off at that point 5 wins in their last 6 games. Many of those coming against really hot or really, pretty darn good football teams. I think the Steelers can absolutely go back into Foxborough and win next week, especially against a playoff inexperienced quarterback like Drake May, who has only played in 1 playoff game in his NFL career. And frankly, he got kind of carried last night because the Patriots, they didn't score that much last night against the Los Angeles Chargers. In fact, May made some pretty big mistakes throughout the game. He honestly didn't look that comfortable in the pocket. He didn't step up in some pretty key moments, led to some fumbles from him. He's pretty lucky that Patriots defense came to play, and that Los Angeles Chargers offense, once again, with Justin Herbert at the helm, did not show up in a playoff game. So I really do think that, especially with the way the Steelers pass rush is attacking quarterbacks, with the way that they're getting after teams, they're the number 1 defense over the last month in the first 3 quarters of ball games. Obviously, you need to play a little bit better in the 4th quarters because teams like the Lions and the Ravens have completely toasted the Steelers over the last month in the 4th quarter. But this is a defense that has really turned a new leaf here in the second half of the season, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And I would love another opportunity to play the New England Patriots, especially because that building is where kind of the playoff loss streak for Mike Tomlin and the Steelers began, all the way back in the 2016-2017 AFC Championship game. That is where, this playoff losing streak began. It'd be really cool to go back to that stadium after the Steelers, hopefully just won their first playoff game in 9 seasons and take down a Patriots team. That is a good football team. That would be a real test for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think it is a game that they can win. Now we can shift our focus and then talking about the stakes if the Steelers lose. Obviously, that's the 3rd straight 10-win season for the Pittsburgh Steelers that ends in a first-round playoff exit. It's the same exact movie 3 years in a row. Maybe not the same exact movie because the Steelers did win the division this year. So because of that, I do think the Steelers probably took a little bit of a step up this year. But there's no doubt, man, if you lose another first-round playoff game, especially at home, that's going to be very, very disappointing for this fan base and all that. And it's probably going to call for a lot of calls for Mike Tomlin to be fired. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of today's show. But there's no doubt about it, man. It would be very disappointing, and it would be the 9th straight season here in Pittsburgh without a playoff victory. And obviously that's something that we hope we're not talking about at the end of the evening tonight, but that is a possibility, especially with a team as good of a defense as the Houston Texans have, especially, with them coming off a 9-game win streak. They are a very, theoretically good and complete football team. So a loss tonight would be very disappointing. No doubt about that. So the stakes definitely feel pretty large. I don't know if they feel quite as large as last year because, last year in the wild card round, you're taking on the Baltimore Ravens, and it's a division rival. Russell Wilson's future with the team is on the line, all that different stuff. I don't think, there's quite that high of stakes in this football game because if the Steelers lose, I think they would still take Aaron Rodgers back. I still think if Mike Tomlin wants to come back next year, he will be coming back. I don't think that the stakes in terms of how much this team is going to be shaped next year is going to be determined by the result of tonight's game. Obviously, the stakes are huge for this season because if you lose, the season's over. If you win, it continues. But yeah, I just keep those stakes in mind as we get into tonight's game. Now, three things that I'm going to be watching out for in this game that I think you should be watching out for as well. And I think it's going to determine just how successful the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be tonight. And the first thing I want to talk about is Pat Freiermuth. He has to be a big part of the passing game tonight, in my opinion. And, depending on how well he does tonight, I think might make the difference in the ball game this evening. And the reason why I say that is because Houston is one of the better man coverage teams in the National Football League. They play a lot of cover one, and they're very good at all three corner spots. Derek Stingley, obviously, is their number one guy. He's going to be shadowing probably DK Metcalf all night long, and I'm guessing they're going to give him some safety help for at least a portion of the evening. So although DK Metcalf is back in this game, I do think the opportunities to get him the football down the field are going to be limited. Okay, I think DK's biggest, advantage that he gives the Steelers tonight, or the biggest boost he gives, is the space that he can create for other players in the Steelers offense. I think that presence in the Steelers offense tonight will be huge, even if DK probably, in my opinion, won't have the biggest stat line tonight. Obviously, we're hoping he does, but just setting expectations for tonight, I'm not expecting like a monster 100-plus yard performance from DK Metcalf tonight. I think it's going to have to be somebody else that steps up. And then, you look at Kamari Lassiter and Jalen Petrie, the other two corners in this Texans secondary, to run as much cover one man as this team runs, you have to be really stout in man coverage at all three corner spots, and they are, man. Lassiter, really, really good player on the outside, and then obviously Petrie knows what he's doing as well in the slot, one of the more versatile nickels in the entire National Football League. So with that being in mind, you got all these great cover players at the cornerback position. You got that great pass rush with Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. You're trying to get the ball out pretty quickly. For me, the piece that could be the X factor for the Steelers on offense in the passing game tonight could be Pat Freiermuth, because they're going to have either a safety or they're going to have a linebacker on Pat Freiermuth for most of the night if they play man coverage, and I think Muth has the advantage in that type of matchup. And then if they decide to play zone, Muth is the zone killer, right? You throw seams to him up the middle of the field. We've seen his and Aaron Rodgers' connection really shine over the last couple of weeks since Darnell Washington, unfortunately lost his season to that broken forearm. But, the silver lining to Darnell being out is that it gives Pat Freiermuth all these opportunities in the passing game, and he is one of, if not the most valuable pass catchers on the Steelers right now. And I think that he is the most valuable pass catcher on this Steelers team tonight, just because of how good the Texans are in man coverage, when it comes to covering wide receivers. So really interested to see what Muth's role in the offense is going to be this evening. And I think he's got to be a big part of the game plan. You got to get him the ball early and often. Aaron really needs to make it a priority to get the ball to Pat Freiermuth. And the good news is I think they're going to do just that. My second question is, how effective are Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell as pass catchers? Because, like we talked about, I think the Texans, cover players at corner are going to be able to do a pretty decent job on the Steelers wide receiver. So it's going to come down to Muth and, how well you're able to get some of those seam shots, maybe some corner routes, so those sorts of routes to Muth. But also, Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell are obviously a big part of the Steelers passing attack. They love to get the ball out quickly. And you better believe these two are going to be getting the ball a lot tonight, because, with Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson coming after Aaron Rodgers, it's going to be a lot of one read to check down for Rodgers tonight, just like we've seen for a lot of this season when we go up against teams with excellent pass rushers. A lot of it is, okay, I'm looking at one concept or one receiver based on my pre-snap look, and then if that's not there, I'm dumping it off to Jaylen Warren or Kenny Gainwell. I'm letting them work out in space. Now, maybe part of the issue with going up against the Texans in particular is they're really good at rallying to the football and tackling. I think they're number one in the entire National Football League on EPA per play allowed on pass attempts that are less than 10 air yards. And of course, the Steelers lead the league in those types of pass attempts. So, it's going to be strength on strength. Jaylen Warren, Kenny Gainwell, about as good of a receiving back duo as any team in the National Football League. That's why the Steelers lean on them so much. They did a phenomenal job last week making guys miss against the Baltimore Ravens. Roquan Smith, Trent Simpson, they just could not bring down Warren or Gainwell on the first tackle, which led to the efficiency we saw in the second half of the game from the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. But in this game, when you're going up against a team that pursues and tackles as well as they do, how effective are Warren and Gainwell going to be as check down options? That's going to be the question. If they can make some guys miss, get some big plays, keep moving the chains, help the Steelers the way that we're used to seeing them help the team, absolutely. This team could definitely have a good night offensively. But because the Texans play so much man coverage, all right, they play more man than just about any other team in the National Football League because they can. That means there's going to be somebody, in the flat accounting for Warren and Gainwell on every single play pretty much. So you're going to almost have to use Gainwell and Warren as like true receivers, run Texas routes and, run actual wide receiver type of routes if you want to get them the football, throw them screens, stuff like that, because, those little check down flats, there's going to be a guy, assigned to those guys in pass coverage, and they're going to be rallying to the football. So I think Rodgers is going to have to, find creative ways to get them involved that don't include just like the simple checkdowns when they do get man coverage. And that's another reason why I think Pat Freiermuth needs to be a big part of the game plan tonight to get those downfield shots, to maybe get them to sag off a little bit from their normal, very aggressive play style. Then the final thing I'm looking out for tonight for the Pittsburgh Steelers is on defense. How much too high safety does the Steelers play tonight? Because this is traditionally a Steelers team that plays a lot of one high safety. And they showed that at the beginning of this season. This Steelers team sucks at playing one high safety coverages this year. It's just the way that it is. They're a much better two high safety pre-snap aligned defense. And when they do that, they've had some of their best games of the season defensively, okay? Like the Indianapolis Colts game and the Miami Dolphins game. And, some of their better defensive performances of the year have come from them playing a lot of two high safety. And when you go up against a team like the Houston Texans that likes to go under center, play action, deep shots, stuff like that, one high safety is not going to cut it. And I think that this is a matchup here where the Steelers can very comfortably live in two high safety coverages pre-snap and still stop the run. This is a Houston Texans rushing attack that ranks 30th in EPA per rush and rushing success rate. So this is not a very effective rushing offense. They got to get things going with C.J. Stroud in the passing attack tonight, and the Steelers need to do everything in their power to make sure that doesn't happen. The best way to do that is to live in these two high safety coverages. That allows you to have ambiguity. It allows you to have leverage, all these different things. There's a reason why a lot of these top flight defenses in the league nowadays play with two high safeties. And the Steelers are one of the best two high safety defenses in the National Football League by the numbers. When they play a two high safety look pre-snap, they're one of the best defenses in football. And I think the reason for that is because Kyle Duggar and Jalen Ramsey are much more comfortable playing in that two high safety alignment than playing in a single high alignment. So I'm hoping that leads to less coverage busts tonight. I'm hoping that leads to a stunted pass game and an offense in general from the Houston Texans. And I'm hoping that we see the Steelers defense that we were hoping to see all season long tonight when it matters most. I do think it's going to be a defensive football game tonight. This might be one of those games, guys, where the first team to 20 wins the football game. But then the final thing I want to talk about here before I say goodbye here, before the watch party tonight, guys, is Mike Tomlin. And, there's some talk once again this week about, is Mike Tomlin coaching for his job, all this different stuff. I think no matter what happens tonight, guys, and no matter what happens in these playoffs, the Pittsburgh Steelers want Mike Tomlin back in 2026. Now, maybe if, they lose by 20-plus points tonight and it's a complete blowout and the Steelers are never, in the football game, then maybe we're talking, about the Steelers maybe having a conversation. But I think all the signs point to Art Rooney II wanting Mike Tomlin back for 2026 if he wants to come back. So the question is, does Mike Tomlin decide to step away if the Steelers lose tonight? I would say it's possible, although I do think it's probably unlikely. I think there's two things that will have Mike Tomlin thinking about maybe moving on from the Pittsburgh Steelers. But both of these things need to happen in order for Mike, in my opinion, to look at this situation as one that he wants to leave. The first thing that needs to happen is both Aaron Rodgers and Cam Heyward need to retire at the end of this season. If both of those guys retire, then, I could see Mike Tomlin being like, well, I don't necessarily want to move on to a different quarterback. The reason why I'm still here is to try and get Cam Heyward a Super Bowl. If he's no longer here, then it opens up the door to potentially leave. And then the other thing that needs to happen is this Pittsburgh Steelers need to go to Mike Tomlin and say, we're rebuilding this offseason. We're getting a new, fresh-faced quarterback, whether it be a rookie or whether it be somebody in free agency, somebody that's a younger guy with no playoff experience, somebody we can build something with. We might think about trading certain players. If the team goes to Mike Tomlin and says, we're rebuilding this offseason and you don't have any say in that, it's very possible Mike Tomlin, is like, I don't want to go through another rebuild. I don't want to have to draft another quarterback. And then even if it works out, it's still another 3 or 4 years before I can realistically compete for a Super Bowl again. I don't know if Mike Tomlin wants to, invest another another chunk of time to rebuilding here in Pittsburgh, especially when he's already tried it. And obviously it failed with the Kenny Pickett experiment. And now, there's certainly an opportunity to try and get some playoff wins and make some noise here in the postseason. But I think if those two things happen, I think if both Aaron Rodgers and Cam Heyward choose to move on and are retiring at the end of the year, which is a possibility, and then the team goes to Mike Tomlin and says, our vision for the future is to rebuild, I think it is possible Mike Tomlin walks away from the Pittsburgh Steelers. But what is the likelihood that both of those things happen? I'm not too sure. I would still say there's about a 90% chance Mike Tomlin is back in 2026 and for his 20th season as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So honestly, I don't think tonight is as momentous as maybe some people on Pittsburgh radio or in Pittsburgh media might try and make it out to be. I don't think this is as momentous as some people are making it out to be. But then, before I say goodbye here, guys, I just want to say, no matter what happens tonight, I do think I would consider this season somewhat a success. Obviously, it would be a playoff failure, but you bring in Aaron Rodgers, and I said at the beginning of the season, the way that I would define a successful season for Pittsburgh is, you have a team that has a chance to make noise in the playoffs. You have a chance, and you have even if it's an outside chance, if you have somewhat of a chance and a glimmer of hope to go on a run in the postseason this year, and get away from this theme that we've had over the last several years, where the Steelers make the playoffs, but nobody, even in our own fan base, believes they have a legitimate chance to go on a run. That's not the feeling this year, guys. Like you listen to people, talk about this team that are fans of this football team. There's a genuine spark of hope that this team could go on a run this season. And obviously it'll be massively disappointing if they don't and they lose in the first round of the playoffs again tonight, guys. But the way of the NFL is that, shit happens. And, there could be some things tonight that don't go the Steelers' way. And at the end of the day, I think the Steelers have I think the Steelers have a pretty decent chance to win tonight. But, there's still at least a 40% chance that they lose tonight, maybe 45, maybe even more than that, depending on how likely you think tonight's game is for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But it's the first division championship in a half decade. You're doing that with a brand new quarterback, bringing in a lot of new players. You did that after pretty much doing surgery on the defense midway through the season. That was a success. You swept the Baltimore Ravens. You got your first home playoff game in a half decade. If the Steelers lose tonight, no doubt it'll be a big disappointment, and it's going to be a tough one to swallow. But I do consider this season and the decision to bring in Aaron Rodgers a success, whether the team wins or loses tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing what this team can do over the next several weeks. Hopefully they can win tonight. But I'm damn proud of this football team and what they've been able to accomplish this year. And, I'm at peace with whatever, happens this evening. So appreciate all of your guys' support. I know tonight this video is getting a little bit out of hand here in terms of the time, so I'll say goodbye here. But Ponzi and I will be going live tonight starting at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Over 2 hours of pregame coverage for you guys tonight, getting ready for Wild Card Monday here between the Steelers and Texans. Full pregame coverage. We're going to have Super Chat giveaways. We're going to have the whole shebang tonight here on Monday Night Football. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Join us at 6 p.m. Eastern time tonight for our pregame show. Until tonight, guys, here we go, Steelers.